Hey team, wanting to make a quick video because politics have been happening this week, especially like the last however many months. It's just been amazing, and so it's definitely worth making a video for. Obviously, Donald Trump did start a war in Iran, and he did not get congressional support, and he took out a lot of naval ships, it sounds like, and the leader over there is now dead, and so we are set to be over there for about 5 weeks, is what it was argued. So kind of wild that he didn't get the support that he needed for that. He just went ahead and did it anyway, and now people are dying. He said bombs are coming, going around, and of course, I cannot verify that for myself. I did see some warnings for some travel bans, suggested not to go to the United Arab Emirates, stay inside, that sort of thing. So that's pretty scary. They're closing down the American consulate over there, and definitely something to be concerned about. Also, big news for Christine Nome. She had her hearings. It sounds like she had a few where they kind of pretended to interview her, but kind of just spoke their own piece over her a lot of the time. There was some yelling back and forth. She had spoken on ICE being in the state of Minnesota in a way that it was incredibly misrepresentative. She was calling a few people who died domestic terrorists, and it sounds like it was kind of a theme where they were calling this person a domestic terrorist, that person a domestic terrorist, whoever a domestic terrorist. And so that's not really good, and that's not really acceptable, especially in the modern era. I know Donald Trump, when he took presidency, said he was over being woke, and that's not something I really agree with. I still believe in the diversity and inclusion legislation, those initiatives. I think they're worth having, and so it's unique to be in a position where, just insulting people and saying that they're a threat, and it was blatantly obvious, given the footage from the incidents, that they were not threats at all, and so that's terrible. So it sounds like she was demoted. She was moved to a different role, kind of an arguable backdooring of sorts, and I think that was the right move, because she was so adamant, and she was speaking in a role of authority and saying that these people were domestic terrorists. They were attacking United States representatives, and they weren't, and it was blatantly obvious. And so that was something that you really can't take back. Just your complete, like, there was evidence everywhere, and so the complete lack of accepting reality and seeing it as it stands. And so that's a tough one. Just there was very little room for interpretation, and it just didn't seem like there was a way that her argument would take ground in any fashion. So not so great, but she had her hearing. She spoke about all sorts of different things. Apparently there was also an ad campaign. It was PR, and I didn't see anything about that, but they're giving her grief for spending a lot of money on this campaign with her face, plastered all over it, and then further monies spent on a jet, and that's kind of a seeming theme for our leadership right now, the airplanes. So but they were giving her a little grief with that, given the exorbitant amount of monies being put into ICE funding, as well as these seemingly superfluous things. I know it seems like Donald Trump was making the cuts for finances, trying to get our balance back in budget because of our national debt. It's exorbitant, and trying to get our finances back in, into more acceptable levels. Trillions of dollars is not great at all to owe other countries and to owe, elites in our country, whoever is willing to buy a governmental bond to put money in, and they are owed money back. Um, and so it's, he's saying that he's getting a lot of donations, and that is actually good, for his projects at like the White House, the ballroom, and things like that. I think that that's something that a lot of people can come together with, and they can make that difference. And if it is something that is desired by a lot of people, for a lot of events, that does make sense to invest and put the time and the money in if there are donations there and people are invested in it right here, right now. I think that's great. I don't mind some of the construction projects that have been going on, and some of the money getting put into infrastructure and into just basic things that we kind of take for granted every day. Just making things nicer for everybody. I'm not against that, especially if we are using donations from Americans, and if we are also being mindful and making good choices when it comes to those things. But anyway, back to Kristi Noem. She did end up getting the demotion, which I think was the right call, just given it's her seeming lack of reason in the propaganda that she was spinning. It just seemed too out there and too far beyond the scope of the actual proof that was publicly available. So not good at all. We need to stop that. We need to stop doing that. We need to stop allowing that in the press, stop allowing lies and pure misrepresentations. We can't have those take root like that. That's completely unacceptable. And if they did take root, otherwise it should have just been embarrassing for her. And I don't know what she was thinking, aside from the propaganda machine, but it was blatantly obvious that it wasn't true. So good that there were ramifications for her, some accountability in that. It should have happened earlier, I think. But it's happening now, so that's fine. Yeah, if I think she should have said something sooner, but we were all in this political turmoil. I also watched the hearing with Tim Walz and the fraud in Minnesota, and he was bringing up ICE. They were trying to speak with him about monies that went towards the feeding. I apologize. I can't remember the exact name. The Feeding America type fund, Feeding the Future, and it was a good initiative trying to take care of people, but he allowed monies to go to these organizations in numbers that were misrepresentative, i.e. they weren't feeding that many people, they weren't taking care of as many people as they claimed, so it was pure fraud. And he caught it at some point, and then so they stopped the money, and then he ended up just giving more money. And I understand how he said, I can't just close down an entire program because some people are committing fraud. People still need the money. They still need to be helped. They still need that assistance. And that does make sense. I understand that from his perspective. It's a broader picture than just those people who are committing fraud, and so he wanted to keep it going. However, I think that would have been the time that he actually nailed down who exactly was committing fraud, because he caught that it was happening, and but it was so exorbitant. The numbers were very high for how many people were actually committing this fraud, saying, hey, I'm helping 100 people a day, and they weren't. And that's not okay that they were trying to do that. And also that he waited so long. Like, he said that they're finding them now and they are being persecuted, but it should have happened a long time ago, because these funds were being dispersed during COVID. And so that's also really not good. That delay there, but it was an exorbitant amount of cash that went into these purely fraudulent claims, and that's not okay. They need to be accountable. It sounds like they are being made accountable, which is reassuring. Thank goodness. That is required, that is needed. And in theory, since they were stealing so much money, perhaps they haven't spent it all yet, so that we might actually be able to recoup some of that, which would be good, because they were like, how are we going to get the money back? It's fraud. And that's another thing with Trump and his tariffs being overturned, his tariffs rejected, deemed unconstitutional. They were like, he's going to have to return the money then that he collected with the tariffs. And, he was saying it was billions of dollars, and that's an exceptional amount also. So lots of monies being displaced, and with ICE as well. We were pressing charges, and I was actually disappointed that they didn't bring up the lawsuits during Tim Walz's actual hearing. They were waxing and waning poetical about ICE and about all these stories that we've heard over and over again about how this person was treated, how that person was treated, and that it is all sad, but it's also I think they could have consolidated how they approached that in a way, since they are common knowledge here, especially in the state of Minnesota, especially to Minnesotans, as well as some stories from out of state as well. Like, we did get some news stories from like Chicago and that ICE situation that happened. And of course, we got some of that from Oregon as well, Oregon. And so, but they didn't really talk about that one. But it sounds like I would definitely want to press charges against the federal government. The state is pressing charges against the federal government. And I think they should have detailed that process and what they were doing about that during this hearing, and they didn't. And so that would have been a practical thing to talk about. But they are addressing that. They are trying to hold the federal government accountable. And, Walz did say, this was a learning experience. I learned a lot, and I can definitely help other people in my circumstances if they come across a similar situation now. So he was talking about that. Of course, he is not running for re-election. And they did kind of hint that he was leaving his governorship to run for president. But I'd say right now we're kind of like, after ICE and after the fraud and all the racism and it was just such a hot mess that I don't know that this would be the best time to step down and then run for presidency. Step down and take a break, or go in a different direction. I could see a little bit more easily. But there might be some more researching there, and I'm not sure if he is going to run for president or not. But right now it seems I wanted to see the hearing treated, I'd say, more professionally, more STEM, more like more of the systems and more of the organization, and I would have liked to have seen that and have that represented. I feel like right now politics, a lot of it is propaganda, and a lot of it is for attention, because they want people in their state to vote for them. They want people to engage in the politics, and so it's a lot of clickbait and a lot of trying to get the better hand and slam people down. And I just feel like at some point they have to stop. At some point, like, I am engaged in politics now, and it's not because someone slammed someone down. It might have been to start with, but like, I clicked in on a couple of those things, but just watching it, and it's like 20 some people like insulting this person over and over and over again. It's exhausting for me, let alone for the person there, who's like, you can see the tension on their face, and then they have to argue their points, and then the other person is clearly not listening, and they don't want to, and they're just like, and it's so rude. It is so rude, and it's not engaging, and then we don't actually get the information that we can say, oh, I understand where this person was coming from, so I understand why they made the decisions that they did. Like when Tim Walz explained, like, he didn't want to close down the program because a lot of people needed the program and they were still using the funds, and that wasn't articulated, like that, like more of that information of like the hierarchy and the, you know, the finding out who handles the ledgers on that and what the accountants were doing. Like, that would have been practical to hear more of, and that was just missing from the entire day. Like, well, who was in charge, you know, the Department of Treasury or whatever, but, you know, state of Minnesota, state treasurer, I guess, state auditor. So lots of things that I felt like have been missing, and the same with like Kristi Noem's hearing. It's there was so much that you could have talked about that would have made her a more sympathetic character. And they did have, like, some people were obviously on team her and some people were obviously not on team her, and so some people were like, this is a nice, like, almost if it were like a law, like a court case, like, this is like a direct exam, I'm holding your hand, allowing you to tell your story. And other people were like, you know, trying to make their point, so saying like, oh, with the details that have already been articulated, this is why you messed up, this is why that's a mess up, this is why. And, you know, so like some people literally were just kind of slamming it down her throat, you know, that, you know, like, oh, okay, well, yeah, you know, how much money do you make every year, you know, things things like that. And and of course some of it is, she, you know, she even said, you know, I wasn't in this role at that time, I just took, you know, office, you know, with Donald Trump. And the same with Tim Walz too, they were asking him and giving him, you know, the third degree. He was like, I don't know those facts and statistics, I was not governor at that time. And so, and that's a tough one too, because you are accountable and they try to hold you accountable for what, you know, what is happening before you have even started, and things that you are kind of tying off and or don't necessarily agree with, or, you know, they're grandfathered in and you have to try and figure it out and work with it. And so, but that's a tough one for them, and so it's good to see them as sympathetic peoples, and not just, you know, our leaders who have failed in some fashion. And it's like they haven't failed, like, and Tim Walz was also talking about our, you know, we take care of our kids, we're great, we're number one in this, we're really high up on the, you know, great quality of life and all this, and Minnesota is a great state, and it is. I am biased, obviously, I am from Minnesota, but you know, he was talking about our accounts and our finances, and I have checked the accounts, and they have been, you know, balanced, and that's actually really impressive. And so so he's not wrong in saying, you know, saying these things, saying we are on top of our stuff, we are a great state, you know, we're getting better and better, and that's a good thing. So it's good to see that these, like, there, you know, there are mistakes, and they don't necessarily represent the entire person. However, given the role and the amount of responsibility that they have, you really, like, some mistakes you really just, you need to be accountable for, like with Kristi Noem, you know, like just blatantly lying to the American public. Like, that's like, she should have known, like, when she was in front of the cameras, that, you know, looking at the evidence, you can't just, like, she should have known. And that is, it should be embarrassing for her, just, you know, with the social media, and that, you know, you can't misrepresent that hard. That's not okay, that's not a good for her at all. And then with Tim Walz and the fraud, I was glad that, you know, he was saying, oh, I couldn't close it down, but it's still a huge oversight that he wasn't able to catch how many people were committing fraud and continued to commit fraud. After he caught it the first time, he should have formed a committee and they should have combed through all of the accounts and they should have said no, 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 instead of allowing it to go on for millions of dollars, So it's um like he should have handled it a lot better. And so it's um that's a fine line too, and he is stepping down, of course, too, and he said that. And um but it is also, that should be an embarrassing point for him also. That's not something that you want to just be like, yeah, people are scamming us and we're just allowing it. That's not okay. That's not acceptable. So it's good to get their perspectives on it. But there definitely wasn't enough information. Like Kristi Noem, she couldn't even like, some people who were like, no, I'm on your side, I will allow you to tell your propaganda story. And then she was able to say, yes, because these people were murdered by illegal immigrants who were mean, terrible humans. And so that was their propaganda story. And it is sad. And we don't want people to be murdered by illegal immigrants. We want people to stay safe. We want people to be healthy. We want relationships to be healthy. But I do understand that is the line that they're going with, is that all illegal immigrants are criminals. But that's it's a varying level, because like some of it is just pure civil, like I just overstayed my visa and I didn't want to go, and that was the crime. It is still a crime, but it's like, and there are other people who are more violent criminals, and they had statistics, but I'm not the biggest fan of statistics saying like 70%, someone said somewhere like 90% of statistics are made up on the spot, and I that made me laugh out loud. And then sometimes I do feel like that is true, especially like talking about Donald Trump's presidency, when they were fact checking his first. We haven't heard that many stories about it this time around, with them fact checking him and just being like, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. But but yeah, so it is a concern, if they're like gisting it, if they're just getting the basic idea out with throwing a number out there. The majority of, you can say words like the majority of, but I know that percentages are supposed to capture the attention, and they are supposed to make things seem more credible. But they can also, if they're incorrect, or that's a very poorly representative. So you can say a majority or a seeming majority, and if that's more accurate, I would probably prefer to use that, to say that, instead of faking statistics. But in some circumstances, statistics are expected, and so you will want to come up with something, some sort of numerical data point. But then you can also do maths and try and make that as representative as possible, and you can actually do the science, and you can do the research, and then you can come up with something. And but that's another story. Yeah, so we had that. We also had the Clintons for their deposition on the Epstein files, and I think I was confused about that, because it's a deposition, and first off, they have so many lawyers. There were so many lawyers for this testimony, and a deposition is where it's like discovery phase, where before a potential criminal or crime court case. And so it's to get facts and get all of the information about all aspects of what happened. And it is something that you are sworn in for, and it can be used in a court of law to impeach, because you can have a written statement. But if you say something when you're on the stand and you've said something else in the deposition, they can hold you accountable for that. And they say, but in the deposition you said this, and so you are liable for that. So it is legal. It's a legal exchange of information, and And this one was supposed to be closed door, and then they did post it after, I think they said 24 hours, per the other depositions that they had already done. But the Clintons did have theirs. I've only watched most of Hillary's. She did not like have a lot of information because she was just like, I don't know that person. I don't know that person. I'm not associated with that person. I don't know if they were involved with the creation of our foundations. It was a little propaganda for their orgs too, saying, well, we've got the Clinton Foundation, and they work with a lot of other organizations like water.org, and and I do like water.org, and so that was, oh, that's very nice, not necessarily 100% relevant to a deposition on Epstein, but of course that is also looking at networks, like political networks. And they said that their foundations work with hundreds of vendors, hundreds of people, and hundreds of thousands of people who are coordinating other hundreds of people, and so they're huge. They're vast networks touched by just this one foundation, this one organization. And that's, the Epstein conspiracy, their model of leadership and model of networking, is a method of networking. And so if it was abusive, and it did dehumanize people, and it abused people, it used people and abused people, specifically young women. I would argue that there were probably young men also that were abused, and not just put in a circumstance where they could abuse by someone who is less vulnerable than them. But I do think that there's more to the story there, and we've not really seen it. We've been primarily looking at the female victims of Epstein, and I think that still needs to be addressed. And the deposition, Hillary Clinton didn't, it was just, I don't know those people. I did not meet Epstein. I barely knew, and the gal's name, Miss Maxwell. I don't think there's a consensus on how to say her name. Her first name, unfortunately. But she said, I barely knew that individual. It was very casual. The big news was that she was a guest at Hillary Clinton's daughter's wedding. But of course, her daughter, the deposition is government oversight to see, I'm thinking, if Epstein had any power within the government, and if they had spread their system of abuse into governance and government interactions. And obviously that is a concern, because we need to stop that level of abuse and that kind of abuse from happening. So it's good to speak with Hillary Clinton. She did say that she wanted them to be stopped. She also said, I don't know anything. This is a waste of my time. Talk to people who know something. But she, I think that's a little suspect and a little concerning, just because her husband was in how many photos. So I think she should have been more obliging in how she interacted with the lawyers. And of course, someone was trying to impeach her over, her beliefs in women's rights. And that wasn't fair. I think that wasn't called for, because her husband cheated on her when he was in office. And so, taking him back, and it's inappropriate to bring that up right now. I'd say it's definitely it's a private matter. And I think that he was obviously a part of that conversation, and there are pre-existing emotions there. And it's not my business. I know that may detract from her in the public eye, of course, and staying with her husband when he cheated. And I have also argued, I was in my French classes, and my professor did say that, oh, if you're a politician overseas and you don't have a lover, then you have no street cred, if and so I was like, what? And then they're like, no, Americans are prudes. Americans are prudes. And and I was like, wow. And so they're talking about Donald Trump and his machismo and how he's got, since he's with attractive women and younger women, and he's a ladies man, and that adds to his credibility with male followers, and so that is something to take in consideration, like establishing your dominance and having self-esteem, self-respect, and addressing things like cheating. But that's very private, and there's obviously a lot of love built into that, and so that's not my business. It may have detracted from some of her power, um, but that's not really relevant per se to Epstein, unless because sex and power is I should write a paper on it. I don't know if I'm an argued expert in the subject matter. I am single. but but it's definitely something that is a dynamic, and of course that was a big dynamic for Epstein, and infidelity was a concern with the abuse. How many of the people were married if Bill Clinton had participated, which I'm sure that he had denied, and I'm sure that Hillary denied that. I think she said that you'll have to talk to Bill. I think she did pull that line a couple times, talk to Bill about it, and but the photos were always of him kind of alone, and so, or like getting a massage or things like that. So there were you could question mark them, you could ask about them, but it wasn't there wasn't any like established beyond reasonable doubt actual evidence, photographic evidence of his participation. And so that is something to bear in mind as well. I do anticipate watching his deposition at some point. I watched Hillary's, and then I saw Kristi Noem, and I was like, oh no, I want to see this, because I really wanted her to be held accountable. And so I did go from Hillary to Kristi, and then to Tim Walz, and then I am gonna get back to Bill Clinton's. But it is tough. It's exhausting to listen, just given, and especially if you care and if you are invested and you want specific outcomes. But even then, you get that there's a pattern in it. So it's like the people who are pro you, the people who are against you, the people who are like middling, they're not gonna slam it at down at you, but they do have a point or two that are real zingers, so it seems like there's not a lot concluded in these, in like hearings, basic depositions, and I will have to get to Hillary, but most of it was I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And so I did have a couple of ideas. I thought that with the people, they should pair photos with them, and like those could be like not open to the press per se, but I don't see why they wouldn't be. But like just like taking pictures from like Facebook profile pics, or or from like job work sites for networking, you could pull their photos from that, and just so that way, because memory is weird like that, where you might hear a name and be like no, and then you see the face and be like, oh yes, and so I think that a lot of their questioning, that like they were like, do you know this person, and they just had like a list of a couple hundred people that were like potential suspects or potential people who we don't know for sure, not suspects, but people to be questioned in regards to the Epstein scheme. And so so they had the list, and I think that they should have tried to get some photos to work as a refresher, so that they could get some more information right away and ensure that it was more representative, because it's so easy to forget a name, but if you have a face, or if you pair it with a face, and you're like, oh my gosh, yes. um, so I do think that they could have done it differently and had more visuals. With like Kristi Noem, they did have visuals for her hearing, and I think that that was good. A lot of people had huge posters, and I think that those visuals were a nice element to kind of pull in. And they had statistics, they had quotes, and I think that was great. And then Tim Walz, it was literally just his face, and then it was actually Tim Walz, and then it was the Attorney General as well, Keith Ellison. And it would just kind of pan back and forth between the two of them. And then we also had the Reverend there as well. They went between those three people. And so we didn't get to see the questioners on that, and that was fine. That was okay. But it was a long 4 hours to sit through, with no like actual condemnation and nothing to really tie it in, aside from like, Tim Walz did say kind of near the end, but still middle-ish, that he is not up for re-election, and he learned a lot. And that was kind of the, like, I'd say, like, the new denouement, the reaching a conclusion. Okay, no, we're still being cross-examined for another half hour, 45 minutes. We're not done yet. So I think, and they were kind of trying to stick it to the Reverend as well, and I think that that was interesting, just because, obviously there is a separation of church and state, but religious leadership is important as well, for the moral, things, the morality, and I think that the person who actually did a nice job of like getting outside of the usual box of these things was, I think, a Methodist representative who was doing the questioning, and he was, I think that he asked questions that were actually relevant, like, hey, I'm looking up and seeing this as a whole, and I'm trying to make this educational and bring it kind of full scope for everyone here. And I think that was really appreciated, because I don't think we had that same holistic approach. It was a lot of hit them with the minutia, get this minutia, let's do this case study, this, and so it was like, okay, now looking at the whole thing, this is how, here, what? And I think that was exactly what was needed. But it was a mess. It's a mess. And part of me knows that I was listening, I was multitasking, because it's, I just wanted to use that time, not just watching TV. It can get a little long, and it can get a little boring and a little bit redundant. A lot of people make a lot of the same points kind of over and over again, using different language, but to build in a mildly different direction. And so it is redundant, and therefore boring. But also still really, really important. And so I am grateful that it seemed like both Tim Walz and Keith Ellison were able to articulate themselves a little more and explain a little more, whereas Kristi Noem, she'd had a couple of them, and then it was yelling over, and it was, I think it's nicer when you can get more of the story out, instead of just like, here's a nuance that, like, it's like paper topics. So this is a paper, this is a paper, this is a paper, this is a paper. These are all papers, academic papers that you can write, and we're getting about 2 minutes of them. 2 minutes per. So it wasn't that cute, but it's so, so important. And so I would like to see them do it differently, like with Hillary's deposition. Going back to that, they were treating it like that, like a few people were trying to impeach her, and it was like, this is still a deposition, this is still getting facts. And so I feel like trying to impeach her right here isn't appropriate. I feel like this is still a safe space and still an open space, and you shouldn't be like attacking her when you should just be getting the information, in case of an actual court case that goes down. You're showing your bias right now. But luckily, you could see the flaws in their argument. You could, you'd object. And by the way, she had how many lawyers with her for her team, for her side, and they were not very good at objecting on her behalf. And she's trained as a lawyer, and she didn't object on her own behalf. I was like, I'm sorry, that's objectionable material. She did say a number of times, I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to speculate. But there were a lot more objections like, what is the relevancy? Why is this relevant? Why is this relevant? Relevancy isn't a word. So there are so many objections. I'm sorry, that's hearsay, but they're parties to the case. So, but she could have protected herself in so many different ways and not had to deal with like a lot of the bogus questionings, like they were literally just propagandizing, and maybe they have come to accept it, that they're like, okay, no, they're building drama, so their constituency will care, and like their social media. And then somebody was like, there's an influencer in the room who has taken a photo, and I just loved how they were called an influencer. Is everybody an influencer now? Like, I think they were supposed to be a lawyer, like they're lawyers, and like, this is a deposition, this is a professional deposition, and this person is being called an influencer. And I was like, I'm sorry, is this like, I think of influencers like social media personalities on like the indie platform YouTube. I don't think these are professional adults. So they're like, there's an influencer in here. Oh my gosh, alert the media. We have an influencer in here. I don't think I would ever call myself an influencer first and foremost. I don't think that that's my personality. I don't think that's who I would want to be. I'm an influencer. My whole job here is to influence other people. And I think that I want more from people than that. Like, it seems very shallow. But obviously influencing people is important, and like, I'm realizing that like I've got this opinion, I've got a perspective, and no one is listening and no one cares, and I'm not an influencer. I don't have any videos that have gone viral. I don't have that audience, and but if you've been around, you know that I don't find the right angles. I'm not trying to be entertaining. I'm just like telling you what I've got right now, and and that's just how it is. And so I'm from an educational background. I've got a traditional like, I like talking to people, and I like talking to people like this. I like talking, like normal, saying my opinions like this. I don't want to become a character to all of the time in order to engage people, because I feel like talking like this is just as engaging if you're talking with someone and if they care, about the same thing. This is definitely a on the level, down to earth sort of conversation. And I think that's fine. I think that's great. And I think it works, but, there are characters who, people who do create personas in order to get more views, and they do, try harder, obviously, and it's more, you could argue it's more manipulative, but it's all done with science, and it's, to see this really seems to work well with an audience that we're trying to reach. And so this is how we're going to create the world. We're going to create the backgrounds to suit, and we're going to create the characters. We're going to make the content fit this demographic, and so it's all about education, and it's about engaging people that you want to engage, people who might not normally talk about this stuff. But it's better if you know someone. And so I'm pretending like I know everybody who's watching this right now. And I don't. I think I know a handful of people who are subscribed to the channel. A lot of strangers, I'm gonna shout out to that random person from California. That was my first troll. And I stopped talking to them. Um, but but their comments were appreciated, I will say. So waving. but I just thought that was like kind of like a almost a slap to the face. It was this weird realization that this person is an influencer. And it's like, you're a lawyer, you're a preeminent like person in the Epstein like investigations, and you consider yourself and want to be referred to as an influencer? And I just think of that as like teeny boppers who do makeup on YouTube. So I think that the rhetoric, it's a rhetoric thing. It's a rhetorical, where I don't agree with that, like in the professional world. But I'm also not in a world where people are making movies, doing makeup, getting dressed nice, and like actually actively trying to influence people all of the time. And a lot of other people are in that world way more than I am. And I have said I am going to try to do more with my videos, and I haven't. I haven't yet, where I'm gonna like try and get it's supposed to be like you're only supposed to be a third of the camera, and things like that, and like the science. And I don't think I'm wearing makeup today. I could have put makeup on or whatever, but yeah, so it's kind of a different world. Okay, but this is an important historical happening that's going on right now. We got influencers in the back, guys. I'm not crying. I do not want your website. I don't want your YouTube channel. I don't want to see your tutorial. I want to know what's going on with the Epstein fraud and abuse cases. I want accountability and governance. And you as an influencer can help people be accountable. And I think that that's great. I would like to ensure that they are following rules of the court, as in, that's, not going to be allowable, materials. It is irrelevant. It's argumentative. That's not fact, and so therefore you can't build on it, because then your entire argument will fall to the ground. If it's argumentative, it's not admissible in court, and so you shouldn't be asking argumentative questions. Argumentative questions are built to try and, propagandize or to try and influence, but we don't need that, because if they're argumentative, obviously they bring about critical analysis, or they're pure propaganda. And so we can have the critical analysis if we ensure the critical analysis, but in a court of law, they'll say that's argumentative. And so you can build it up. You can build your argument a different way, so that way it's less argumentative. You can fill in a couple gaps in the reasoning and the logic to ensure that it's no longer argumentative. But you have to go through those steps and make sure that you build it in such a way that it's not argumentative, and it's a reasonable line of thought to get to that not actually argumentative conclusion, and then you want to move forward from there. So I would like to see people actually do these hearings, these depositions, and asking these questions. Obviously they want to engage their audience, but I've had this conversation, I had this argument over Facebook with someone, but it was better if it's completely admissible, like in court. It's not argumentative. In court, it's beyond a reasonable doubt as the standard. So it's not a majority vote. It's not a popularity contest. It's not, well, I think this is not based on your opinion. It's actually, this is what the facts show beyond a reasonable doubt. And I appreciate that, and I think that it's much more stable than just putting things on your opinion. Of course, some line of reasonings, like if you have more data, it's better, and I don't have a lot of data to back up a lot of my assertions, because I have a traditional education where it's a lot of classroom learning, a lot of textbooks and things that I didn't do the science first and foremost in and of myself. So I get flagged, saying, people will say, you don't know that for sure. All of like how much of your knowledge is built off of they say, like, okay, we'll go biblical for a second. Like, is your castle built on rock or on a sand? What is your foundation? And so that's something that I need to work on, of course, because I am very much a humanist and I like person-centered, and a lot of the more liberal arts, human, oh gosh, fine arts, and like a lot of those things, and whereas I'm lacking in the STEM, but I do want to see their arguments follow the logic of the courtroom, which I'm gonna kind of put in with STEM, because it's I guess it's more linear and it's reason building. It's like a proof in math of just saying this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, the conclusions. And there is actually an overarching term for that, and I can't remember right now. I think it's some philosopher or something's name in way of reason. But it's I'd like to see them do that more, less argumentative and more like use it. And I don't mind if you say you used this word and that's an inflammatory word, that's an argumentative word. Let's talk about that, because why, and it could be a subconscious thing, it could be a misunderstanding of what that word means. I don't mind nitpicking the minutia of the language that you have used, and I think that there obviously is room for argumentative discourse in that, but I think that you can say, well, that's kind of a negative connotation, that's suggestive of this, and then building an argument with that. I think that's fine, but if you're saying something that's just it's hardly credible, or just misrepresentative of a number of people in the population, I don't think you can call it like a universal or an overarching truth, without it being objected to. And I'd like to see that objection sustained oftentimes, where they say, no, this is a universal truth. This is, this is just how it is. And I don't much care for that. And so I would like to see accountability, and I'd like to see the reason, logic. I do it too sometimes, but I'm also not an influencer, and I don't have a lot of people who are deferring to me on these things. But I'd still like to see more accountability. I'm annoyed having to sift through the BS listening to these hearings, and like that object, and then you have these news stories that have been submitted as evidence, and they like, that's where we're like, no objection, no objection. I'd like to enter this into evidence. No objection, no objection, no objection. But I just think that we'd like to hear more. I do object. Why? Because they're wasting everybody's time trying to get these followers on the internet when they're hardly credible. They're purely argumentative. None of that would be admissible in court. And they are honestly just here to hear their own voice, and it's offensive, it's annoying, and I'm here because I want to get actual facts so I can actually build something with the information. And the way it's standing, I'm gonna have to do research, and I would have to send out emails. I would have to do, when all of the information is right there in front of you between that person, and you've got 20 people who are 20, plus people, it feels like, who are questioning those people, and we're still not getting the basics. It's so frustrating. But I am going to wrap up this video. I just wanted to talk about the politics, and I actually made a challenge to see if I could talk about politics for an hour, because I do have another hour-long challenge that I'm going to be participating in. Inspired by a friend, and this actually I was kind of like, well, maybe I'll stop at like 20. Normally I stop talking politics at like 20 minutes. 20, they're my longer videos, but there's like 30, tops. And so this was important, and I did want to talk about it. There's so much going on, and it's definitely worth talking about. We've got also another thing, we're talking about the news articles being brought into these hearings. I think verifying the credibility of those articles is important, but also if they are being entered into evidence, obviously a lot of that you kind of just have to slough off, like, okay, well, somebody had something that they wanted to say, and so they're going to make an article about it, and it's argumentative, and if they have the facts, they might have more facts than not, or they might not have that many facts, but they just wanted to talk about their opinion. That's okay too. We do need to have people's opinions, and we need to have people critically analyzing, but then as they build, they should learn that they need more data with their analyses if they want to get anywhere, and that's good too. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping for with some of these hearings, because it's like I listened to the entire 4.5 hours, and I've still can't build my own argument based on what we've heard over and however many people's little direct examinations, little cross examinations. Still didn't get all the data points that I wanted to build my argument and like actually have it float. So frustrating. So but then I was thinking too about the deposition specifically. Like, it's not a court case, we're not pursuing that now, but of course a lot of people want accountability, and so then people were like cross-examining them in their depositions, and or direct examining, I'm on your side, I'm on your team, tell us your story. And I feel like that's, even if you are on team prosecution, you still, it's the deposition, so I would probably try to play it out more direct exam in that setting, I think, is what I was thinking for that. But because you're just there to get the information to see what they know, and so if you shut them down by crossing them, by automatically saying you're wrong and I'm going to try and prove it so obviously too, that it's just like, obviously right now they're just trying to collect data, and they're trying to build their arguments and get the information, and if you close people off, if they are annoyed, they're not going to answer as much as if you can get them talking and keep the dialogue going. And so that's better when you're trying to get data, before you prosecute getting the information. And so that actually, it did bother me, and I was like, this is a deposition. I would object so hard, and even the attorneys, they weren't using the appropriate like objections too, and I was just like, object, just keep it simple, keep it concise, just say objection. That's argumentative. I wish for it to be stricken from the record. It was an unfair extrapolation. You can say, and then move on. And then how many people's entire questioning would just be like, gone? How many people? I know. So I'm frustrated a little with our law system right now, because I'd like to see it. I'd like to be able to build my own argument after I've seen 20 other people building their arguments, and I have more information that I want. And so with that, I'm gonna end this video. Lots going on. We need to hold Donald Trump accountable. He's not posting on his Facebook as much, his official Facebook. Now I'm going over to his Truth Media, his Truth Social account, and I don't have any friends on that. If you have a Truth Social, let me know. I'm looking for real humans. I've got so many, or like not propaganda pages, like websites, like news sites and things. I'd like to see real humans on there, and so not more platforms. So if you're on there, let me know. Because right now the only person that I have been going over to see is Donald Trump's, just because he doesn't post on his Facebook anymore. So frustrating. Okay, I will talk to you later. Bye.